the last section, we introduced this concept of state inside of our component. State is the concept that we use for updating the data that our components show over time as the user starts to kind of click around, or whenever we start to load some data or any type of update to our application. At this point, we've had a little bit of a discussion about state and written some code around it. In this section, I want to expand more on the idea of state and exactly how our component is now working now that we've introduced state. So let's pull up a diagram. So this is an updated kind of timeline of what's going on inside of our application. And I know the text is small now that I look at this. I'm just going to finagle with some of the sizing real quick. All right, maybe that's a little bit more legible. Okay, so again, this is the timeline. We went over this previously, but I've added in a couple more steps now that are colored in green. So now we can walk through the timeline of our application. So again, our application boots up, app shows to the screen, the app renders itself, header and album list, and now when album list gets created, it gets an initial state of albums being an empty array. So when the thing first boots up, albums is an empty array. The album list says, okay, I'm being rendered, time to call component will mount, blah, 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 makes the HTTP request, and then its render method is called, and it appears on the screen. So the album list is rendering one time when its state is still equal to an empty array. And we were able to confirm that because our console log over here in Chrome, we saw, hey, albums is an empty array. And we had placed that console log inside of our render method. So clearly, the render method is getting called at least one time here before any data has been fetched. So then some time passes, blah, 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 and our HTTP request, there we go, returns some amount of JSON data to our component. And so now here's where the magic happens. We have a request handler that calls setState. And it says, hey component, here is some new state for you. Here is the complete entire list of albums. Because we call setState and we update our component's state, the component just album list, not the app, not the header, just album list instantly gets re-rendered to the screen. So the second time the render method is called, we now have our list of albums, and we were able to confirm that with our console log. Here's the list of the 5 albums. So the point here, the whole kind of point of this is that now we can write our render method in such a way that it assumes that there's some amount of data available as this.state.albums, and that is how we are going to write a component that is going to show a list of data or some amount of data that we fetch asynchronously. So we are using state, the concept of state, to fetch some data to show to our users. So let's do a quick review of state, and then we will update our component to actually, show some good stuff on the screen. So one last thing, I want to go over some rules of state. So first off, I've kind of skirted around what the real definition of is for state. I've just been saying state, state, state. I can say it all day, I guess, but it doesn't really make any sense until I give you a plain text definition. So here we go. Definition of state: a plain JavaScript object that is available to class-based components only, that is used to record and respond to user-triggered events. And so that last part here, user-triggered events, I use kind of lightly, kind of freely. If you think about it, a component loading up kind of is a, kind of a user-triggered event. It's something that the user triggered. They launched the app on their device. Yeah, they triggered it. And we now know that the user just requested some amount of data, and we now need to show it to them. So think about state whenever you want to update your component in some fashion because of a user-triggered event. Now the second rule that I want you to be aware of for right now is that whenever we need to update what a component shows, whenever we want to re-render in some fashion, we are going to call setState. That is what we use setState for. When we call setState, the component instantly re-renders. So whenever we want to update what it shows, you gotta be thinking state. And I'm going to just again and again and again, I'm going to be, throughout the rest of this course, I'm going to be saying, okay, we need to update the component. We need to show something new. What should we be using here? And then you at home, ideally, you're going to say, oh, state, yeah, hey, we should be using state. And then, we're going to use state, and we're all going to be really happy. Okay, so I'm just going to keep doing that throughout the course. Next, last rule I want to talk about, we only change our state, we only make updates to it with the method setState. We do not do this dot state, and I guess I kind of dropped my thought there. Oh, no, it's on there. It's just not showing up. We do not do something like this dot state equals 1, 2, 3. Okay, we never modify a property directly. We always call setState whenever we want to update our component state. Okay, the last thing to say here that I did not actually put on this slide is the difference between state and props. This is something that people really get messed up or kind of confused over time. The difference between the prop system and the state system. So I'm going to give you a lot of guidance as we go through the course about which one we want to use. But let me just say right now, just give you a general rule of thumb. Whenever we want to communicate from a parent component to a child component, we use props. Okay, so props is for parent to child communication. State, on the other hand, is for a component's internal record keeping. That is the purpose of state. We use state whenever we want to update some amount of data over time. Whenever we pass data from a parent to a child, then it is props. That is the difference between the two. And again, I will point out just a ton, when we should be using one or the other. All right, so that is just a ton of lecturing. Ton of lecturing about state. I think that we're in a pretty good spot now with state and fetching data, all that kind of good stuff. So let's continue in the next section, and we are going to work on making some nice looking albums to show the user, nice looking album components to show the user. So let's continue in the next section by making use of this new albums data that we've now fetched.